Welcome to Concordia University's Force-Space, and thank you for joining us for today's event, Perspectives on Sustainability Research at Concordia. Now, just to help situate you, if you haven't been here before, we are streaming to YouTube, we are live from Force-Space, and we are located here on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. And here at Force-Space, we work with our university community to help mobilize knowledge. We co-create daily activities that examine research questions, projects, things in development across the university. And we're running today's event as a live stream Zoom meeting, so anyone joining us there, we welcome comments, questions via the chat, and we'll read them out during the Q&A period, so definitely do that. Those of you here in the space, similar idea. If you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone over to you so that everyone can hear. Okay. With that, it's now my pleasure to hand it over to Coordinator, Sustainability and Research at the Office of Research, Brett Cox. Brett, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doug. Just confirming, so those are the slides that folks online see? It will. Okay, I'm just gonna go back for a second. Okay, perfect. Yeah, thank you so much everyone for being here. Doug just introduced me, so I don't need to do that, but welcome to our event today, Perspectives on Sustainability Research at Concordia, where our intentions, quite broad strokes, but providing opportunity to showcase various sustainability research happening at Concordia, providing the opportunity for the Concordia community to learn more about the sustainability research ecosystem at Concordia in general, and provide the opportunity to discuss and share sustainable research practices and methodologies. This event was organized by the Office of Research, Office of Sustainability, and the Loyola Sustainability Research Centre. Specific shout out to Cassandra Lamontagne, Christian Vevreau, and Rebecca from the Office of Sustainability, Rebecca Tiller from the Loyola Sustainability Research Centre as co-organizers of this event. Of course, big thanks to the Fourth Space for hosting us in your beautiful space here, as well as thank you so much to our panelists and our moderator here for taking your time to be here today. Really much appreciated, and all of you for attending online. Yes. Before moving on, I want to note that this event has received Gold Sustainable Event Certification. No big deal. And we invite you to review information pertaining to our certification on one of the digital screens here. But I know there's more information at the back there. And that this event is part of Campus Sustainability Month, a month-long series of sustainability events and activities at Concordia. We invite you to scan the QR code at the entrance of the Fourth Space just back there to be entered into a prize draw. The more you participate in the activities of the month, the higher your chance of winning. So yes, taking a step back, breathe, stretching, not thinking about how anxious we are right now. We want to acknowledge that the work that we do and the relations that we build at Concordia take place on stolen lands, respective to the Ganagahage Nation, where Tiohtià:ke is historically known as a gathering place for many Indigenous nations. As we engage with sustainability as a concept and framework for research and ethical action, it's critical we remember that sustainability is nothing new. We've learned that sustainability has and continues to be woven into the fabric of Indigenous knowledge, practice, and culture for time immemorial. And unless we honor and engage with those perspectives in our understanding and approach to sustainability, our work is not sustainable. We recognize that Indigenous nations are the frontline communities most adversely affected by climate change, biodiversity loss, and other sustainability crises. Many of the most important sustainability progress taking place today is due to the leadership and knowledges of these communities, and we commit to act in ways that are in solidarity with their rights and sovereignty. To engage further with the topic of decolonization here at Concordia, I have 3 resources highlighted there. The first is the Indigenous Directions Action Plan to come out of the Indigenous Directions Office. The plan details concrete steps towards the decolonization and indigenization of the institution in order for us to co-construct a new shared future based on responsibility, reciprocity, and respect. And there's a very real call in that plan for all Concordians to engage with the action plan. The second resource there, I have My Relations, is a self-reflection guide produced by the Office of Community Engagement that provides key principles and values to guide any non-Indigenous individual or organization who wishes to decolonize relationships. And then lastly, on the right there, I have the Decolonial Toolbox, which is a resource produced by a collaboration between the Office of Community Engagement, Makana, and the Montreal Indigenous Community Network. The toolbox offers educational pathways to understanding the contemporary Indigenous realities, covering topics from terminology, territories, and colonial history. Brief overview of our agenda. So after I finish speaking, I'll pass it off to the panel here. We'll have research summary presentations where they'll be diving into their sustainability related research. Moving on to a discussion about the challenges and opportunities that they face incorporating sustainability into their practices, into their processes, into their goals of their research. And from that, we'll move on to audience engagement, Q&A, discussion, etc. And then the last hour of our event from 4 to 5, we'll have a few grad students here postering, showcasing their sustainability-related research, along with refreshments. Just a few housekeeping notes. There are not bathrooms in this space, but just straight across the hall there are gender-neutral bathrooms. We also have some light refreshments at the back there. As noted, from 4 to 5, we'll have more dedicated time to getting up, networking, all that good stuff. But please feel free to get up at any point during the event, go get coffee, tea, fruit, cookies, yes. And with that, shout out to Chef Sean Samuels for our catering. So before starting, part of the intention, as I noted, is that we wanted to provide an overview of the sustainability research ecosystem at Concordia. So I want to dive into some of that. In terms of engaging and pursuing with sustainability research, it's important to be aware of the various sustainability resources, groups, centers, guides, etc., that you can tap into and build relationships with. And the sustainability ecosystem at Concordia is quite extensive. I'm also more than happy to send anyone these slides afterwards or be meeting with you to talk about these things. So please feel free to reach out. So first thing, if you just type Sustainability Concordia into Google, click on the first link there, you'll be taken to this page, which will provide you a complete overview of the sustainability ecosystem at Concordia, or as much as is possible at least. And from there, you'll find all the links to the following pages that I wanted to quickly show. So first here, I have the Concordia Sustainability Ecosystem Map, a map that was put together by former student Karin Ballet, where she went through an exercise of trying to depict the departments, groups, associations, and partners focusing on environmental, social, and economic sustainability at Concordia. It's a really great resource for getting a sense of the various folks out there who are engaging with sustainability in some way, shape, or form. Next here, I have the sustainability brochure that was put together by the Office of Sustainability, and this is a great resource for gaining a further understanding of the various sustainability groups, as well as resources at Concordia. Here is a screenshot of the Introduction to Sustainability training, also organized by the Office of Sustainability, and the module is aiming to give participants the ability to define sustainability at the university, identify key supports, utilize available campus resources, and identify key goals for improving your social, economic, and environmental efforts. Next there, I have a screenshot of the various think tanks, institutes, and research centers at Concordia, such as the Loyola Sustainability Research Centre already mentioned, or the Sustainability and Digital Age think tank that works to influence policy changes to reach global climate goals, reduce biodiversity loss, and support more equitable access to the digital economy. There's also the Concordia Institute for Water, Energy, and Sustainable Systems that seeks to train students to be at the forefront of sustainable development practices and research into new systems, technologies, and solutions for water, energy, and resource conservation, as well as the several others there. This is a sustainability research guide put together by the library that can help you navigate finding journal articles and other research literature in various sustainability fields. And then taking a step back, here is the Sustainability Action Plan, and it includes a long-term vision as well as five-year plan around 5 streams of action: food, waste, climate, curriculum, and research, with goals, targets, and strategies for each stream. And it's the research stream that my role was created to help lead, and what our event today is in line with. And the initiatives of the Sustainability and Research Action Plan helped us to it really helped us to better understand that there are sustainability identifying or sustainability related researchers in all faculties in every department of the university. And so part of our intentions with the event today is to showcase some of that research from across the faculties, also in efforts to show how diverse, relational, and intersectional sustainability efforts are and need to be. And just with that, wanting to highlight one initiative that came out of the Sustainability and Research Action Plan is I've said sustainability so many times, oh my God. The Sustainability Transitions Team Research Initiative, which was an internal funding program that sought to inspire and support interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary community-engaged research that is responding to the increasingly complex and interconnected challenges that we face as a society. With 3 years worth of funding, the program has provided funding to 13 different research projects from across the faculties, involving a wide range of topics such as food security and literacy, sustainable urban planning, trans communities facing the far right, solar energy and community integrated research creation, net zero carbon cement production, and a lot more, including the work of one of our panelists today, Felice Yuan. Yeah, there's a lot going on at Concordia, as there should be. And so with that, I will stop there. I'd like to now pass it off to our moderator, Jim Grant, to introduce our panelists and facilitate the ensuing discussion. Jim is principal of the Loyola College for Diversity and Sustainability, co-director of the Loyola Sustainability Research Centre, and professor in the Department of Biology, where his research focuses on how the distribution of resources in space and time influences the aggressiveness of fish. So pass it off to you. Thank you so much, Jim.
Thank you, Brett. Thanks for that introduction. Thanks for that introduction and for helping organize this great event today. So I have the nice job of introducing the stars of the show. So I will keep my comments very brief so they have more time to speak and to give our audience time to ask questions. Suffice it to say, they're all experts in sustainability in very different fields of study, one from each of our faculties. They're all Concordia professors. And so that's why it's a very diverse panel. And we're going to hear some really interesting interactions, I think, amongst them. So let's just introduce our speakers. First, it's going to be Dr. Felice Yuan, who's a professor in the Department of Applied Human Sciences in the Faculty of Arts and Science. So there's Faculty 1. That's a big faculty to represent, Felice, but I'm sure you do it just fine. Her research focuses on leisure and its impact on the quality of life of individuals and communities in which they live. Our second speaker is Dr. Shannon Lloyd. Hi, Shannon, who's a professor in the Department of Management in the John Molson School of Business. She tries to bring science to the corporate world, I think. Her research focuses on life cycle assessment, greenhouse gas accounting, and corporate sustainability in general. So welcome, Shannon. Our third speaker is Dr. Govind Gopakumar, who is a professor and chair of the Center for Engineering in Society. I think the "in" was the key word there, right? In the Gina Cody School of Engineering and Computer Science. His research centers on the socio-political aspects of urban infrastructure and the governance of infrastructure change, which is going on in society at a high rate. So welcome, Govind. Thanks. And our final speaker is Juan Ortiz Puy, who's a professor in the Department of Studio Arts in the Faculty of Fine Arts. He's an artist interested in a variety of issues, including materiality, commodity fetishism, which I think we've seen a lot of in our society these days, and environmental exploitation. So welcome, Juan. So I guess I turn you, Elise. You each have, what, 5 to 7 minutes or so to speak about your research in general. I'll kind of wave at you at 7 minutes just to warn you, because we're all professors, we love to speak, to warn you to start to wind down. So, Felice, take it away.
Thank you. All right, I think everyone can hear me. And awesome, the slides are up. So, You, Me, and All My Relations. That's the title of my little talk today. It's also the title of a journal article that was published earlier this year with community collaborator Wanda Gabriel, who is Mohawk or Ganyangahaga, a healer and an academic, and also graduate student Brittany Weisberger. We were part of a larger team that looked at the rehabilitation and healing needs of Indigenous women in provincial prison. So I'm not going to be talking so much about leisure today, but Really, the connection was leisure and healing, in case you're wondering. And the article focused on ethical research protocols that were grounded in relationality. And so today, what I really wanted to focus on was this notion of all my relations. So to note, the story doesn't start here. There's no beginning or end, but here is the point where myself and the research team had the honor and privilege of listening to the stories of 35 women who are Indigenous in provincial prison. Women that we asked after experiencing a medicine pouch workshop, what would they say to their younger selves? And so they came up with things like be strong, love yourself, be brave, be happy, be patient. And you can see images of the pouches that were created during those workshops in the prison. Here is where we heard the stories of 16 frontline workers in the community who have been working tirelessly, some for over 30 years, with Indigenous women who have been criminalized. And we heard stories about how they witnessed too many deaths from overdose and suicide, and how they battled and continue to battle racist systems that are supposed to help then support the women in their re-entry and while they're in prison. Here is also where we heard the lived experiences of 16 prison staff and guards and learned that they are not the enemy, that they are ignorant, know that they are ignorant, have had to educate themselves on the colonization of Canada and the impacts that it has on the women in the prison, and have been screaming at correctional services for training and education. What does this have to do with sustainability? You may be wondering that. I asked myself that. And to be honest, I came here with some hesitation because relationality is not something that we often think about when we think about sustainability. Relationality, as I've learned from the community organizations, Indigenous organizations that I work with in the community and Indigenous scholars, is relational. Is part of sustainability because it contributes to the way in which we process, engage, co-create knowledge. Relationality isn't an individual entity, and it's not something that is gained, and it's not a product. But it's grounded in a process that involves not just interpersonal relationships, and not even relationships person to person with the research participants that we might be working with, but it is with the cosmos. So it's in the air, it's in the plants that we see, in the animals that we see, it's within the spirit that exists around us. It goes beyond the idea of individual knowledge that we produce or that we create as academics. And I think most importantly, that we are answerable to all our relations when we're doing the research. And I think, I'm not gonna really get into it, this research has ceremony other than what I just said, but just to say that it never ends. The research projects, the multiple research projects that I've worked on, they stay with me, and I carry the stories with me. So to be clear, I am not Indigenous, I am Chinese Canadian, and I came into this research because of my research assistantship that I did during my first year of my PhD. It's where I met Indigenous women in federal prison, and I was invited out by the president of the Sisterhood, which is the Indigenous group in the federal prison for women, to go to their Monday meetings. And then I was invited to their powwows, and then I was invited to their sweat lodges, and then I'm here. And so it really is this relational connection that landed me here today with you. I was supposed to research music festivals and community development, so way off from where I am today. So considering all my relations in research is about honoring the women that I've met day in, day out. It's about honoring their stories of trauma and of healing. And so I used to do qualitative research as I was trained, and I certainly did that in my initial work. So those qualitative researchers in the room, if there are any, it's collecting data through interviews, analyzing it often through software, looking for patterns, thinking linearly often, and categorically, and then writing and presenting, and you're done. But not so much the case. Over the 20 years that I've been doing this, as much as I've tried to stay linear, rational, categorical, there was this emotional and embodied and spiritual push for me to something else. And so now I honor that too. So arts-based research, which is some of which I've put up today for you to take in, is how we, so myself and the research team, attune ourselves to the emotional, spiritual, and embodied and collective knowledge that is out there. It's a way in which we pay attention with care and respect to all our relations. It's to not just read the transcripts from the interviews or the focus groups, but to listen and to engage. And so you might be wondering, well, how do you do that? How does one become more emotional and embodied? And one of the ways, very specific ways that I thought I'd quickly share is through poetry. And so this is from an article that my graduate student and myself wrote when we were using poetry as poetic analysis and representation. And so yes, it was expressed through the form of a poem, not my poem, because I'm not a poet, but through the graduate student Sandy Shalema, who is also a published poet. And so the difference here is that we're not rereading the transcript, but we're actually listening to the voices of the women over and over again. And we're allowing ourselves to become emotionally connected to the stories and what they were sharing. So with the women, the research that I do, yes, it's about the trauma, yes, it's about the cultural genocide, but it's also to celebrate their strength and their courage and their cultural regeneration. I actually grew up learning that emotions, particularly anger, fear, and sadness, have no place in a functioning world. But now with my work, I am more attuned to that embodied knowledge, which allows me to connect with past, present, and future. So there's always that hope there, which is the critical element in the research that I do, and also with the rational, emotional, physical, and spiritual. So you might still be wondering, okay, what does this have to do with sustainability? And so I'm gonna end this little presentation with a statement. Engaging in relational research provides a solid foundation in which we can engage in meaningful, long-lasting, feasible social transformation. So for those of you who like concrete connections, Brett already mentioned the UN Sustainability Goals, and the work that we engage in relates directly to two of the goals, which is to reduce inequalities and to push for a society that contains peace, justice, and strong institutions. So last little introduction here for Mo and Jonathan, who are in the back. Actually, it's Dr. Mo that we call him now because he just recently successfully defended his PhD. But this is sort of the next phase of our journey here, where we are working with, this is a picture of the academics group at Commun, which you'll hear more about from Mo and Jonathan. And we're starting to look at sustainable practices for healing and justice in Montreal, which inevitably connect back to better supporting Indigenous women in prison so that there's not that revolving door. And also the idea that their pathways to crime, they don't have to go down that road because society is more welcoming for them in the lives that they live. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Felice. I'm sure there are lots of questions, but we'll keep them later for the Q&A and for the panel. when you can ask each other questions. So, Shannon, please.
Well, thank you, Jim. I'm going to take a little bit of a higher level perspective in my presentation and provide an overview of the different research themes that I and the students that work with me engage on. I'm also going to start with the Sustainable Development Goals instead of ending with the Sustainable Development Goals. So I sense a theme here. I'm not sure where the slides are.
Just give us 1 second. You'll see them
No
pop up.
problem. I can start telling jokes for the next couple of minutes, sustainability themed jokes until we get the slides up. But no, I'll go ahead. So there we go. Whoops. Sorry about that. Okay, so this, just to try to position my research in this big umbrella term, sustainability, I'll use the Sustainable Development Goals as a reference. And so these are the three that my research most aligns with. So goal 12 is focused on responsible consumption and production, 13 on climate action, and 8 on decent work and economic growth. And really from the perspective of goal 8, I'm really looking at safe work environments for workers. And so what my research aims to do is really to identify opportunities for improving the sustainability of consumption and production systems, so really of industrial systems. Another theme of my research is really focused on aligning performance to goals that have been set based on science or based on societal values. And the one that I've primarily focused is on the science-based targets for greenhouse gas emissions. Okay, so I should say that my research is really grounded in the principles of industrial ecology. There are many different frameworks within industrial ecology, but most of my research really is grounded in life cycle thinking. And so I just put the standard life cycle assessment illustration here. But the goal of this type of research is really to think about the industrial consumption activities as a system. And so there are many different activities that occur and many ways in which industrial actors and consumers engage with the system. And those practices and engagements determine the environmental impact of this system. So the resources that are consumed, as well as the emissions and waste and valuable products that are generated by these systems. One thing that you will see different about the approach from my research than sort of standard LCA is that I've also been incorporating worker health and safety into my research. So we do look at labor practices, and the impacts on the workers that are engaging in these systems. Okay, so my research really falls into 3 main themes. So I'm going to walk through each of those and provide a couple of examples of studies that I and the students that I work with have conducted. So the first is really focused on environmentally responsible innovation. So really using that life cycle assessment or LCA framework from a perspective vantage point to assess the potential environmental impact of emerging technologies and practices. So this is really thinking about what can we do differently, and if we do it differently, will it actually be better? And so a few of the examples are illustrated at the bottom of this slide. I'll just kind of walk through them very quickly. So and they're really case studies. The first one was a study where we were looking at a new technology that used a robotic pulse water jet system to remove coatings from components. And we were really focusing on aerospace components, actually landing gear. So using this instead of the traditional electrochemical decoding process to remove coatings during the maintenance of aircraft. The second one is an example, and you'll sense a theme that's related to aerospace here. But the second one was a project where we looked at the use of electric trucks to tow aircraft at airports instead of having them taxi powered by their own engines to reduce carbon emissions. The third one is a project where we were looking at, there's some aerospace components that are now centrally made using additive manufacturing. And what we were looking at is, well, if you actually relocate these, the equipment to make these components at the sites where they would be used during maintenance, so if an aircraft required the replacement of a part, for example, how would that look? How would the supply chains change, and would it be environmentally preferable? And then the fourth one is a project that we're working on right now, where we're looking at different propulsion systems for business aircraft, and right now we're looking at a dual fuel system that would burn both hydrogen and jet fuel. So in these case studies, we really were looking at, well, what's the life cycle environmental impact? So looking at the supply chains, the way in which consumers would engage with these, or end users would engage with these systems, and use the LCA framework to evaluate the environmental impact or identify opportunities for further improving the environmental impact of these systems. In terms of collaborators, I primarily work with technology experts, developers, and users. So I bring the LCA know-how, and they bring the understanding of the technology, and then we work together to conduct those analyses. The second theme, as I mentioned before, is integrating the work environment, so worker health and safety, into life cycle assessment. About 15 years ago, a group of us who were working in the LC area started talking about how we're always working on these projects that we have an interest in reducing the environmental impact, either because they have a large climate impact, or maybe there are a lot of hazardous materials and chemicals that are used in the production of these products, or whatever it may be. And in many of these cases, there happens to be large potential impact to workers as well. But when we do, use the traditional LCA, we completely overlook those impacts. And so we were interested in trying to figure out, how do we integrate worker health and safety into these studies so that we don't shift the burden. Maybe we reduce environmental impact, but then cause more harm to workers. And then also, LCA is taking more of a global perspective and looking at global supply chains. And so if you make assumptions, based on the supply chains here in Canada, for example, it may be different if the materials and products that are being used in your system are produced elsewhere, and the worker health and safety laws may be different. So this is really new research. We have worked with collaborators at a variety of institutions and have developed methods for including some aspects of worker health and safety, the ones that are listed here. And in this work, and actually one of the PhD students who's working with me, Mina, will present her work, including impacts related to exposure to inorganic particulate matter via inhalation. So she'll share that research with you during the poster session. The collaborators here are primarily people who work on risk-related areas, so industrial hygienists, risk scientists, toxicologists, and a variety of others. All right, and the third and final area that I'm going to talk about is focused on the alignment of industrial practices and processes with sustainability goals. And so the work that I just talked about, really we're often looking at, well, what do we need to do less harm? But the question that we always get asked, and I've been working in this area for, I guess, about 25 years now, but the question that you're often asked is, well, is it good enough? And the answer often is, I don't know. I can tell you that this system performs better than this system in these areas and worse in these areas, but I can't tell you if it's good enough. And so there's a lot of great research going on tangentially to this research, focused on planetary boundaries or science-based targets, trying to align or identify what our goals should be, and what is a safe operating space for the planet, and then trying to align that to, corporate practices, human practices, whatever it may be, to basically allocate what's good enough to different actors. And so the work that I've done, this was primarily with a postdoc who was with me for a few years, and then another PhD who has since graduated, but looking at the alignment of corporate climate action to the Paris Agreement goals. And so I hope to expand this to look at other areas of environmental goals, but right now we've been primarily focusing on climate. And so the first one was the first chart, which I don't expect you to digest here, but what we were looking at is different methods for setting science-based targets and saying, okay, well, if companies all use this method, would they actually be aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement? Or if they use the least aggressive target, if they found the method that set the least aggressive target, would we be aligned? What if they set the most aggressive target? Would we be aligned? And then this chart is really like we just did we did some random sampling and assigned the different companies to different methods. And so what we found is that some of the methods, they would be in alignment if they actually set targets according to that. But if they use the least aggressive, they definitely would not. If they use the most aggressive, they would. Here with the random, you can see initially in the early years, we would be aligned, and then we would stop being aligned. The second one, we were looking at, so within greenhouse gas accounting, companies can use a market-based approach where they purchase the rights to claim renewable energy via renewable energy certificates. And a lot of studies have shown that, this theory of change, that if we invest in renewable energy certificates, that it will trigger more spending in renewable energy, hasn't necessarily shown to be true, and these emissions that we claim to be reduced aren't actually additive. And so the vast majority of RECs do not contribute to emission reductions. And so what you see here is the green is the part of the reductions that are attributed to other things, actually reducing energy consumption or installing renewable energy on site. But the yellow is related to purchasing RECs. And so what we see is, and this is just for the Scope 2 emissions, so this is emissions from purchased energy. So what we see is that companies are really grossly overestimating the amount of emission reductions from their actions, not intentionally, but via the purchase of RECs that are not additive. Okay, so that hopefully those three slides provided a good overview of the different research themes from my group. I'm just going to close again with the SDGs. I think what you'll see, the little tagline from the bottom, is sort of where my research has gone over the last few years, really focusing my early research on really let's try to figure out how we can do less bad, reduce our environmental impact, to now trying to figure out, well, how do we assess whether or not the work that we're doing and the changes that we're making are good enough? So with that, I will turn it over to Govind.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shannon.
So I'll stand up here. And just wait till the slides come up. Oh, thanks. All right. Thank you. I want to talk about the contradictions of sustainability and how they have sparked kind of emotions of hope and despair in me. Should I point there or here? Okay. All right. Let me start first with an acknowledgement, but given that the acknowledgement has been read already, I want to kind of start by thanking the organizers for inviting me here. And in some ways, standing here and speaking about sustainability, I get this kind of sense of being an imposter in some ways because, in many ways, I want to acknowledge my complicity in a lot of unsustainability. And so that being said, I think I find it interesting to think of sustainability as a space of practice. And I locate my research projects within that kind of space of practice. In doing that, I have these kinds of axes of thinking about sustainability. And so I didn't, unlike my colleagues, I didn't go with the SDGs in some ways. And I thought I prefer kind of thinking about sustainability in a way that it's not been institutionalized so much in. And so I think of sustainability as a particular kind of forms of modes of action and looking at analysis of understanding those modes of action. I also think of sustainability as an aspect lying on a spectrum of thinking of power and autonomy. And also of thinking of sustainability as representing, as thinking about the kind of change that's embodied in efforts to make sustainability and do sustainability. And so I locate my research within this kind of three-dimensional space where I see sustainability efforts located. As a mode of action, I think of sustainability as lying somewhere between technocratic action and collective action. As sustainability as a form of power and autonomy, as somewhere between sovereignty and coloniality, and thinking of sustainability as an agenda of change, as somewhere between kind of innovation that could be potentially, novel and radical, and in other ways as being in very, perpetrating forms of lock-in and unsustainability. And so, based on where the kind of work that I do, I think of myself as being somewhere between hope and despair on this quadrant, on this three-dimensional space. And so the first research project, which is a very recent one that I've just gotten into, and I think of as an effort to build hope, primarily because I see it located at the quadrant where, and I'll just talk about that in a minute. So it's a new project. It's about developing a community-led agri-food hub, and the effort is to kind of create a collaborative partnership with an indigenous community group, SHIFT, which is the SHIFT Center for Social Transformation, which is an incubator space on campus for socially transformative efforts, and the Gina Cody School of Engineering and Computer Science, where I'm located. And I think what we are hoping to do through this project is to kind of contest contest kind of embedded values of efficiency, economic and technical efficiency, and in the process kind of bring in the place for embedding values of sovereignty, community centricity, and bioregionality. Now, the heart of this is this collaboration. Now, I think this is where I think it's key. The nature of the collaboration is what would, in some ways, ensure that this is a potentially a hopeful project. Now, we are at a very early stage in this project, and we're hoping through this project to construct a community-led agri-food hub, which would in some ways be in alignment with the ideas that Tigaños has. And Tigaños is a women's collective that's led by Brooke Rice, and she is a Kahnawake community member and a Concordia student. And we're interested in, through this project, in not only kind of reinventing indigenous foodways, but also potentially rejuvenating cultural traditions, and creating a space where food can be produced, processed, and cooked and distributed. So that's the intention, and at this point we're in the process of figuring out. So we've done some background research into how other community groups in North America have looked at agri-food hubs, have looked at the kinds of governance mechanisms associated with it, have looked at the kinds of innovations with regards to technologies, potentially renewable energy, potentially a greenhouse. So we're still in that stage where we're thinking about the options, and then we've had a community consultation where we brought together the indigenous community together, and we had a great interaction about what would the community like to see in an agri-food hub. What are the priorities? what are the kinds of technologies they'd like to see, what are the services that the Food Hub could provide. So we are in that stage where we've had the consultation and we want to try and see if the community can get the space together, get the land to house the Food Hub. It's still at an initial stage, but I think this is also important because in thinking about how do we keep hope alive in this context and thinking about these different modes of action, of questions of power and control, and of thinking about indigeneity in innovation, in order to make sure that we're not in some ways replicating the what do you call it, the asymmetry in the relation. Now we have a community partner. It's a very initial small group that hasn't really had a lot of standing within the community itself, and they're partnering with a very established academic institution. They're partnering with engineering, where there are accepted ways of doing, accepted ways of knowing, of how technology needs to be constructed. And so questions of sovereignty, questions of lock-in are something that need to be engaged with in the process. And so we're in that stage of how do we keep hope alive. There have already been questions of is this a good strategy of partnering with an engineering faculty member, because, and that's not me, with someone who actually does engineering research, and how do the methods that they employ, the kind of technologies that they would like to see, whether it's AI or whether it's, you know, computer engineering, how would they conform with the community priorities, and how can we make sure that we are reconciling with the community priorities and making sure that those priorities are centered to the development of the Agri-Food Hub. Now, the next project that I want to talk about briefly is something that I've been working on much more closely, which is somewhere where despair in some way is writ large in that project. And this is the work that I've been doing for several years now on high carbon automobilization in megacities in the world. And this is predicated on the enormous growth in automobiles that one finds in megacities, be it in Beijing or Jakarta, Mexico City, Delhi, Bengaluru, Bangkok, with several million vehicles that now crowd the streets on these cities. And associated with that is efforts to manage automobilization. There's a discourse of how do we try to address automobilization in a way that potentially can lead towards a more low carbon pathway of mobility in the city. Now, in doing that, I think there have been a series of solutions that have been proposed, and much of that is characterized as sustainable mobility. And sustainable mobility is a range of policy solutions, usually understood in terms of public transit, in redesign of roads or traffic calming, or of transit-oriented development. And often these are packaged together into solutions that, into ideas and solutions and kind of transferable policy concepts that then are very innocuously called kind of transfer of sustainable mobility, when actually transfer means, in some ways, the transfer of solutions that have been tried and tested in Western European contexts to Southern contexts, with the expectation that in those contexts, those would lead to more environmentally friendly outcomes. But then whether that is the case and what does that mean in some sense leads me again to the question of how did we get to this situation where we are reliant on kind of decontextualized decision making, where we're constraining the agency of Southerners in order to receive solutions that are often tried and tested and developed in very different contexts, and then proposed as a means of trying to address a problem which has very different dimensions and it's experienced very differently in Southern contexts. And so often leading to, in some ways, not to a solution to a problem, but often leading to perpetrating lock-in in these cities. And this is what my research has demonstrated. And so in doing that, I think we want to move beyond just a focus on focusing on despair and thinking about efforts that could potentially be hopeful in that context. And again, thinking of those mode of action, of control, and an agenda of change. I think it's some of my efforts have been in trying to construct a manifesto of change, working with community partners in the context of reimagining mobility in the city, away from top-down solutions to trying to construct solutions on the ground. And this has not been easy, primarily because mobility is such a space for institutional action, as opposed to action that can come from the ground and that can be accepted by different communities. And so we've kind of worked in this area. Again, these are very small efforts, but I think the predominant kind of theme in this research is certainly one of the contradictions of sustainability writ large. And so in thinking about sustainability, I think the work that I'm doing in some ways shuttles between kind of hope and despair, and thinking about these modes of sustainability as a mode of action, as kind of power and autonomy, and as an agenda of change, in thinking about who are the actors who are involved in these sustainability efforts, what is their positionality, what is the kind of knowledge that they use and bring, as well as the kind of histories that they're embedded in, and then what is the purpose of the interventions that they undertake. All right, thank you.
Thanks, Govind. Juan, go ahead.
This microphone works, right? Great. I thought that maybe we will make it even by me standing as well, so we have 50-50, 2 people sitting down, 2 people standing up. But hi, everybody. My name is Juan. I'm just going to wait for the PowerPoint to come up. As Jim mentioned, I'm faculty in sculpture, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my efforts in sustainability in my own research and teaching. I have about 6 minutes, so I'm going to try to pack it as quickly as I can. So I'll go through some of these. Me and another full-time faculty member, we recently redesigned the sculpture curriculum. We reinvented the whole thing. And 2 of the guiding tenets for that redesign were sustainability and decolonization. So now our students at the 200 level, they can take courses on sustainability, which is working with found materials, organic materials, repurposed materials. And then they can do, for example, sculptural woodworking. I have an example there on the table. It's that kind of odd, kind of brown looking thing, but it's actually the fruit from a tree called Banskia. And you can put that on a lathe. If you don't know what a lathe is, it's a machine for woodworking that spins materially horizontally very rapidly. And you can shape it into beautiful forms, glue them together, and so on. So it's kind of related to pine cones. Yeah, exactly, so that one. Thank you. Last year, I co-taught a course with 2 colleagues on public art and sustainability. It was an inter-university, multidisciplinary course. It was 4 different universities involved. The image that you see here on the screen is from that project. So we divided the students into teams, and this is one of the team's efforts. There are the names of the students. The whole thing is made out of cob. If you don't know what cob is, it's essentially a mix with clay and hay and sand together. And I have these two odd-looking things here on the table, so those are examples of cob. So the way that this thing was made was we basically lined hails of bay, and then we covered them with cob on top. And then you can seal the cob to make it like water-resistant and waterproof. So these are other examples of students' work, but at the 300 and 400 level, so students can take sustainability too, so continue with their research into sustainability. They can do a course called Materials and Services, which is about developing portfolios of material exploration and technique acquisition. We literally make materials in class, like we follow recipes for how to make organic materials. And I have an example on the table, which is this leather made with banana peels and cinnamon, and it smells really good. And then they could do a sculpture as practice, which a lot of the students end up working with sustainable materials. So Justine Beliveau, which is the image here on the bottom right, they collected lint, the thing that accumulates in dryers for months and months and months. And they had bags and bags of lint, and then they process it the way that you make paper, in a way, like making sheets with the lint mixed with organic glue or natural glue. And then they layer them in this way to make a mattress for this bed. So it's a really fascinating project that they worked on. Something I'm involved in that I'm really excited about is I'm proposing a field school here at Concordia. It's called Learning from the Cloud Forest. The field school will be based in Costa Rica at the Monteverde Institute, where I'm from. I grew up 45 minutes away from this place. And if you haven't been into, the Institute is literally at the edge of a rainforest, a cloud rainforest. So cloud rainforests are like a very unique ecosystem. And if you haven't been into a rainforest, I would argue that it's the most aesthetically interesting experience that you can possibly have. So there's no museum that can compete with the diversity of color, shape, and form, and texture. And because there is so much competition in a rainforest for food and light, so nature expresses incredible amounts of creativity. So the field school will be about us going there to learn from the rainforest. I have a little map. It might be a little bit hard to see, but that red pin, that's what the Monteverde Cloud Forest is. It rains about 8 months a year, so there's a permanent clouds above the canopy of the trees. And it would run for 2 weeks, 3 credits. This is a sales pitch in a way, in mid-June of next year. But yeah, the goal of the course would be, as I said, it would be about creativity and aesthetics in the rainforest. And there's so much that we can learn from that. I just have this quick example, but the image on the right, that stick-looking thing, it's actually an insect. Some of the course topics that we'll explore, we'll look into the role of color in tropical plants. We'll look into the role of mimicry. We'll do workshops on bioconstruction and sustainable building materials. We'll do workshops with natural dyes for textiles. We'll do a sustainable public art project. We'll do permaculture, or we'll look into permaculture and sound walks at night. So if you haven't walked through a rainforest at night, it's also one of the most incredible spatial and acoustic experiences that you could have. So I'm envisioning this thing as this sort of interdisciplinary course. So if you're a student in music or photography or textiles, that there will be something quite special for you, I think. The image that you see, that is literally the classroom where the class will be. This is behind the institute. So obviously we'll spend a lot of the time out in the rainforest, but part of the day will be at this classroom. Sustainable building materials, there's a very long history of that in Costa Rica. As a lot of you would know, Costa Rica has some very strong environmental policies. It protects 25% of its territory as national parks or biological reserves, which is the most in the world. 99.9% of the energy in the country is renewable. Single-use plastics is forbidden in about half of the country. And then working with cob and adobe, there's a lot of houses and a lot of history of that. So this example here is a house built with cob, pigmented with natural dyes on a timber frame. So there is, except for the foundation, there is no concrete, which is obviously very energy consuming and not as great for the environment. People that I'm collaborating for this project, Professor Nalini Nadkarni from the University of Utah, and she's done some really groundbreaking work about the canopies of rainforest trees, so specifically plants that live up there. Also Mark Wainwright, who's an author, nature guide, and instructor for tropical ecology courses in Costa Rica, and wrote this really well-known book down there called The Mammals of Costa Rica. Also Lynx Guimau, who's actually French-Canadian. These are all researchers and scientists who live in Costa Rica, but Lynx is actually French-Canadian as well. He is the Chief Technical Officer and board member at Sail Cargo. That is a really interesting project. They're essentially trying to create a sailing cargo ship. So a cargo ship that will be zero emissions, which is kind of remarkable. And then Willow Sukowski, who wrote this really incredible book, The Tropical Plants. That will be, doing workshops and exercises with them down there. And I think that's probably about 6 minutes. And now I'm going to invite our award-winning grad student to do a presentation on the work that Teresa Dory has been doing in ceramics, which is also incredible. So thank you so much.
Hello. Can you hear me okay? Sometimes I have a quieter voice. First of all, thank you to everyone who presented so far. I really liked the parallels between so many projects and really seeing the interdisciplinarity at play. I feel that that's something that is incorporated into my own project as well. And so I'll keep it brief because I'm a student and Juan snuck me in to speak now. Brett approved, but anyhow, without further ado, my project basically is a group project that really focuses on connecting various departments and thinking about the starting point of studios and a practice and how that can relate to a larger scale and impact sustainability. So maybe when you first think about sustainability, you aren't thinking about fine art right away. But I feel that it truly is one of the ways that we can help impact positive change for the future. And part of that comes through creative thinking, and then another part of it comes through working with the material, and then giving students those skills to literally sculpt the future. Which sounds cheesy, but it's been really incredible to see in the last year already so many students taking some of the skills that they've learned in these opportunities and really tying them into their own practice. I think something that really continues to inspire me is thinking about small actions that you can take to try to impact it. I feel that sustainability is a word, as Brett mentioned earlier, that you say so much and it almost loses its impact. So I think one of the ways that we can try to shift that is by taking small actions in our communities and trying to make that on a larger scale. So for instance, with this project, it started out in the ceramic studio, and it was really thinking about how to impact the community, how to lower our waste levels, and how to really bring creative solutions to the studio. So part of this included working with local materials, so reducing extraction from sites that are all around the world, and working with clay that we have in Canada, which is low fire. So also thinking about research about how to change and I'm gonna pause there because I realize I'm not talking to ceramicists. Maybe some of you are, but ceramics, we need to fire the material to be from earth to a sculpture, essentially. And so oftentimes it's a really long process to fire and requires a lot of energy and is at a really high temperature. But our local clay in Canada is at a lower temperature. And so trying to recalculate how to change the recipes to be using more local materials and less extraction. And then there were several research projects where students were able to, for instance, focus on local clay, which is where you have the insects, or processing grog, so any substance that is crushed up and mixed into the material to strengthen it that would otherwise be landfill bound. And then work on their research and then present it to the community. And so this was a really great opportunity for students to come together. And we aren't exclusive to ceramicists, we open them up to everyone. And so this is our team, and I'm gonna go by these really quickly. So this is an example of the grog and the workshops that I was mentioning earlier. And just in general, what we're thinking about in terms of moving forward is really how to work with other departments. So if anyone is interested at all, I think we would love to hear from you. So the biggest impact that we were able to record in a metric scale was lowering our water consumption. And we did this by basically, instead of using running water to clean tools, we were making a bucket system, and then the clay that was sinking below, we were able to recoup that and then make a workshop out of that. So really bringing to light the waste that was gonna go down the drain. And so, yeah, just thinking about these small skills and how they can impact on a larger scale. And I think that starts with small actions, but then also in terms of going beyond undergrad or graduate studies and beyond the community of a school, you can really think about how to impact change on a larger scale. So this is all very ceramic nerdy stuff, so we'll go by this more quickly. So yeah, thank you for your time and attention, and I look forward to hearing more of your presentations. And okay, I thought I had, it's in my other poster. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much. In fact, your talk transitioned us beautifully to the next part, which is about sustainable research practices. So we've heard about the diverse sustainability research going on at Concordia, which is pretty incredible. I was going to talk about the breadth of sustainability, but I don't think I need to. Two of the four of you, or at least two, mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, and at least two of you mentioned Indigenous perspectives, which is often missing a bit in the SDGs. So as maybe we'll start thinking about how you engage sustainability in your research practices, and writ large, meaning environmental, societal, economic, and Indigenous perspectives, perhaps. So I thought I'd just ask you each a question, maybe get you to answer in a minute or so, and then hopefully get us talking back and forth, if that works. So, do your research methods and processes incorporate sustainability, and if so, how? Felice. Oh, yes. We don't need that. Good.
When I first started thinking about what I was going to talk about, there's an Indigenous scholar named Margaret Kovach. And I attended one of her talks here at Concordia when I first started here in 2008. And she talked about this Uncle Louie or Aunt Doris principle to research, which connects with the all my relations in the sense that your research needs to be okay for Uncle Louis or Auntie Doris or whoever. And so I guess in that sense, it really struck me because I was like, yeah, then research ethics just from the institutional perspective goes out the window, but it works anyways. It fits because I would never want to harm my family. And so I guess I think about like sustainable relationships, and you don't want to cause harm, but rather you want to support and care for and pay attention to and listen to these people in your family. And so if we think about it in that way, my relationships with the community partners in which I work with, and also with the people that I work with, like the other scholars that I work with, and there's always this sense of care, I think, for each other, and it's really needed in the kind of work that I do because it's pretty dark and full of despair. And so you can easily fall down into depression, and so we're there for each other in that way. But so I think that's what I think about, this principle in terms of ensuring that relationships are sustainable so that we can do the work that we all want to do collectively for societal change. and increasing ultimately the quality of life for Indigenous women, but also knowing, having worked with them for so many years, it's so embedded within the land and all these other ways of connecting that Western world doesn't really think about. So I
Thank
think
you.
that's my minute.
Thanks, Felice. Go ahead, Shannon.
So how sustainability integrates into my research. I guess if I think over, the last 2.5 decades while I've been an active researcher, I've always felt like sustainability was part of my research, but then when I look back, I feel like sustainability was not part of my research. And so I think that it's sort of the evolution of sort of understanding sustainability and being able to think about what is and what isn't sustainable in a more comprehensive way. And so as I mentioned in my slides, a lot of the work that I do is really looking at less harm. So, my focus is environmental sustainability. So I think there's been, we as researchers in this area have really been trying to figure out how to transition from this thing that is sort of relative sustainability to something that's more absolute sustainability. And so, the way that we're doing this now is really moving towards trying to make relative comparisons between different options to making comparisons to what an objective might be according to some goals that have been set in some way. So I think that's one way in which hopefully my research is becoming more sustainability focused. But I think the other is that there's just so many aspects to this idea of sustainability. And so, again, as I mentioned, my work has really been focused on environmental sustainability, but then we start to think, again, this concern about workers, which would really be more of a social sustainability perspective, and so then we try to figure out how to integrate these other aspects that might be very important in the specific area that we're looking. And then I will say, most of my work is, focused on, identifying change for industry. And so while I wouldn't really refer to this as economic sustainability, we do have to consider the cost aspect of almost everything we do. So while my earlier research was really focused on focus really on the environmental aspects, that's really changed over time. And in almost all of my projects now, we do really look at the cost components as well, because in order for something to be adopted, there generally has to be a cost argument as well. Unfortunately, but that's reality. So I would say that learning how to incorporate these different aspects, but then also to collaborate with experts in these other areas, because I am not an expert and I'm not an industrial hygienist, for example, and so I have to work with people who have know-how there, and so that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges that I face. So I don't know if I answered your question exactly, but sort of.
Yeah, sort of.
Okay.
So Govind, it's quite clear in your new project. How do you incorporate sustainable practices in your research?
Well, I was going to say my approach thinking of sustainability has been as an interdisciplinary scholar who exists at the intersection of several fields. So I'm in some ways an urban studies scholar, someone who looks at technology, and so a technology studies scholar, but also to some extent to look at South Asian aspects, so maybe a South Asian studies scholar. And so, but I think the overarching aspect of thinking about sustainability has been at the intersection of looking at context, at looking at technology, and at urban society. And so in that context, I'm particularly interested in how infrastructures are everyday and are everywhere, and we use it on a regular basis. But often they're under-examined because they're everywhere, and they're examined only in situations where they break down or where we need more of it. and usually then our considerations of the kind of need for technology in those contexts then become overarching to considerations of sustainability. So that's been my larger work, but I think thinking about sustainability, I think requires thinking about the mode through which sustainability is practiced. And that's where I think in my newer project, I think we are at the stage where we are rolling out the project. And so I don't think we've got into the situation where we can look at it from a distance and say, this seems to be how it's happening. We're still in the trenches trying to make sure that it does happen, or if it doesn't happen, maybe there's something to learn from that process. But I think my larger goal has been to look at the intersection of technology, sustainability, and particular contexts.
Okay. Before Juan goes, maybe I could use Shannon's life cycle analysis. So let's say we did a life cycle analysis, but you have to think of it differently. A life cycle on harm and hope and despair of your research 10 years ago versus now. What do you think it would look like? Is it actually, is your footprint getting smaller, or is the hope-despair ratio getting bigger, or what? So anyways.
I think it's just getting more complicated. I mean, in my art practice, the answer to your question is yes.
Yes.
The short answer is yes. The long answer is it's complicated. But as a maker of things, it's impossible for me not to think about the impact that the things that I make have on the world. And even just the question of, making sculpture in the 21st century, what does that mean when you have giant patches of plastic floating in the ocean?
Right.
And it's definitely a challenge, and it's a hard challenge, because sometimes using the sustainable material is less easy than using the non-sustainable one. Like using the non-sustainable glue, might be sometimes easier than the sustainable one. And there's even questions about durability that sometimes are complicated for art making, especially if you're doing things for a museum that would have a question about, how long is that thing supposed to last? So yeah, I'm not sure if I answer your question, but I think it's complicated.
Sure.
In different ways.
So it's impact versus artistic impact over ecological impact. You're trying to maximize that ratio in a way. Yeah, that's cool. Okay. Any others want to jump in, think about?
Sure. I think in thinking about over the past 10 years, I think the question of sustainability has become a lot more urgent. But at the same time, I think along with the urgency, the situation of despair or of more of the same seems to be much more prevalent in a lot of the research that I've read about infrastructure and change, and about technology practice. It seems to be that there's more noise around sustainability, but at the same time, I'm not convinced that, at least this is the cynic in me, and so, maybe maybe the others will have more hopeful.
Well, I was going to add that I think the conversation is also going towards resilience today, as opposed to maybe 10 years ago, because the changes are here, the thing is happening, the consequences are here. So thinking about resilience, I think, is really important as well. But I was also thinking about that today, that relationship between sustainability and decolonization is also more present and so important too. And I was thinking about, Felice, your concept about relationality, which I think is so related to sustainability in many different ways. And in terms of indigenous epistemologies, relationality or reciprocity, I mean, there are beautiful ways for thinking about relating in a kind of more ethical way to natural resources, the earth, and so on.
Great. Good.
I was thinking about how you said it was more complex. And I noticed in all our research, we have collaborators from different fields. And so the interdisciplinarity of it is partially what also makes it more complex. And at least for me, when you thought, 10 years ago and now, I would say I've connected with people from various disciplines. And so then you're taking in different traditions, different ways of being, constructing knowledge, deconstructing knowledge, decolonization, like all of that. You have to, before it was easier in a way 10 years ago, because all I did was leisure studies and talk to folks in leisure. And now, got criminology, and now I can add all of you to the repertoire of connection. And so I think it's fascinating, and it provides for a really rich, more resilient way of doing things.
You want to jump in, Shannon?
I don't know. What would I add to this conversation? So your question was about the sustainability practices. Are you referring to the way in which we do our research,
That's
or
right. Yes,
and the
yes.
outcomes? I mean, so if
we all need outcomes. But
so
how do we get there?
if I think about like just really on a very basic level, so 20 years ago, or maybe even 15 years ago, if I were doing a study, I would travel to the client sites or the developer's site, and we would there would be a lot of travel associated with collecting data, right? And so, I mean, this is just sort of thinking really at the very basic level of the environmental impact of what I do. And now, I engage with way more people now and travel way less to do much more comprehensive analyses. And I don't know if that's because, I think it's partially because the way in which we engage has changed, but also partially because, my network has grown and my understanding is deeper, and I'm able to have these engagements in a way that we can just do so on video or phone without ever met in person. So I don't know. I haven't done a study to look at the impact of my engagement. From a impact perspective, hopefully the impact is becoming more specific, I think, more targeted towards decision makers, but, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Well, let's think about it. If we're all trying to be more sustainable in our practices, of course, but we're also trying to get our grants renewed, and we're funded often by Tri-Council funding, which is limited. Is that an advantage or a disadvantage? The Tri-Council funding structure, in some ways they're ahead of the curve, it seems like, in some ways they're not. What do you think about, and it doesn't have to be Tri-Council, how does your funding structure help you or hinder you into sustainable research practices? So really I'm saying, there's limited dollars, which is the Canadian reality. Right. Does that help or hinder? Anyone?
I think it helps, but I don't have a fully. Oh no. I think it helps, but I'm still thinking about your question. I'm trying to think about ways that it doesn't, but I feel like it helps that there is momentum on it and a lot of emphasis and focus on it. So I think it is something that seems more easily justifiable in terms of like research questions and outcomes and all of that. But yeah,
One thing that has impacted the research that I focus on is that many of the calls for proposals have some requirement, for example, to incorporate sustainability or sustainable practices or some aspect of environmental impact or whatever it may be. And so I'm routinely invited to be part of proposals that are focused on some technology to help incorporate green design principles, or to help new researchers think about how to assess the environmental impact of what it is that they're developing. So from that perspective, I think that I've had more opportunities to collaborate through the changes in the way in which calls for proposals are structured.
If I could add to that, and I think the Canadian kind of research granting ecosystem has become more diverse. I think there are now other envelopes in addition to the Tri-Council, the much more disciplinary kind of envelopes. And I think there are also some transdisciplinary, and I'm thinking New Frontiers Research funds, and then there are, which I think make it easy for, I think there are requirements for interdisciplinary, demonstrating interdisciplinary, transdisciplinarity. And so then sustainability research and research of those who don't really fit within kind of established disciplines have more opportunities, and I think I've benefited from those situations. But at the same time, I think, you know, what I find also particularly problematic in the funding ecosystem is the focus on in some sense bringing bigger and bigger pots of money, and kind of focusing that on one individual or a small a group of individuals. And I think that kind of concentration of power and wealth potentially is not great for academic. I mean for kind of making sure that there is some level playing field of, because I think what often happens is people are over competing for small sums of money when there are enormous sums of money that go to, and so there's a lot of inequality in the research ecosystem, and I think efforts to grow that and to make that more innovative in some sense is contributing to the kind of inequality much more in that.
Okay.
And just some random thoughts again. I'll be the cynic on the table.
Yeah, he said he'd be the cynic on the table. I had a hesitant yes as well, but it's like, oh, I can't believe I'm saying that. But I think that it has contributed because of the special calls, because of the need for interdisciplinarity and community collaborators. I think that's great because it's really pushed academics to connect with the people that what we study often impacts the most. There are ways that it's been challenging, but I think at least like SHIRK, that's the main funder that I work with. For example, there's on the idea of reciprocity, it was that our community collaborators had to match or contribute a certain amount of money. And it's very difficult when you're working with grassroots organizations who are struggling to get money for themselves. Why would they push it towards an academic study? So over the years, they've been more willing to consider in-kind contributions, so that's helpful. And again, it kind of creates that foundation for reciprocity, but I wish that it wasn't so. It still feels very rigid and formulaic. So it'd be nice if there was something, if it wasn't such a strong component, I think. And there was something else, but I can't remember.
Brad, I know we're running a little over. Can we go a bit longer? Okay, great. Well, what do you think about 10 years ago? It was all about papers, the counting, maybe shows or something. You had to quantify your research. And was that bad for sustainable practices? And are things, I sense things are shifting. I'm not sure how much, but do people, and this is about your big money. Do big grants make you wasteful? You do fast research and become wasteful in a way? That's what I'm wondering.
That's what I was going to say. So thank you for bringing that question up, because I was thinking about the cost. So there's the environmental cost of traveling. There's also the dollar amount. And so in our grant applications, we write about going to conferences. And so the last grant I think it was conference in Australia and conference in New Zealand. But then COVID happened. So then I had all this money and I wasn't going to these conferences, or if I was, it was through Zoom. And I thought, well, what can I do with that money? I have the money, of course I'm gonna spend it. So we spent it on dissemination, but the creation of these reports, and they're fun reports. They're not like, right, there's like nice art and stuff. They're meant for coffee tables. But we spent the money on the creation of a website, and these reports gave them to community organizations, and that is so much more meaningful than me going to a conference in Australia. And so, yeah, it has changed, but there is unfortunately still that need to produce in that very conventional way of publications and conferences. But through COVID, I don't know if it would pass, if I would get the money, if I were to show how much money I was going to spend on reports that are not intended for academic audiences and a website. I mean, I suppose that could be an allowable expense, but certainly not prioritized.
So when you apply for your next SHRC, can you list that booklet in your CV and we'll account for you?
Well, yeah,
You think?
but one,
Okay.
right?
Yes, yeah.
Because we're back to number
Yeah,
counting.
back to numbers, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, you brought it up a bit about, I've often thought we get pushed into fast research because you get a 3-year strategic grant and you get all this money, more money than you've ever had before, and you have to spend it fast. And it tends to lead to unsustainable, so Shannon has to fly over there and then fly over there. Well, if we just had slightly bigger operating grants and got to do our slower research, I don't know, just what your thoughts were about it, and if it's affected the way you do research in terms of your big footprint, whether it's ecological or other. Okay, go ahead, sure, go.
No, it's a great question, and during COVID, I remember writing a short piece on the importance of slow research, and I think it was during lockdown, and when, like you said, I mean, none of us could travel, and I was thinking more in the context of engineering and the sciences, where I think attending conferences and the number counting, the bean counting is so critical to advancing knowledge production. And so in that situation, I was thinking maybe the lockdown, the COVID lockdown, would be an opportunity to re-envision the university and granting systems in order to think about, how do we do slow research? But then lockdown ended, and I think it became, there were efforts to try and reimagine the university, but I'm not sure they amounted to much, and I don't know, maybe things have changed, and conferencing now does offer options of virtual presence, but I'm not convinced that things have changed in the knowledge production industry.
So this is somewhat related. At a recent conference, I had a conversation with several colleagues that we've known for a long time, and everybody's sort of at the same space in their career at different locations. Some of the members of this conversation are from government, some from academia, some from industry, and we were all sort of talking about how we really feel that we do much less research now, right? We're for us supervising students, teaching courses, engaging in a variety of different committees at the university or whatever it may be, and so have a lot less time to think deeply and engage in research. And it was the same with my counterparts who are in government. They're managing programs now, and so they have a lot less time to really think deeply about theirs. And so we also feel like we're at this point where we have so much knowledge, and we really want to be able to spend more time thinking deeply and making big impact, but don't have the time to do it. So I don't think it's necessarily related. It's not related to. Maybe I do waste a lot of time writing grant proposals. I don't know. Actually, sometimes I think that it's a waste of time, and other times I think it forces me to become focused, which is good. So I can't say whether it's a net good or net bad. But I think having more time to, at this point in my career, to think deeply and and hopefully produce more meaningful output that would lead to more sustainable outcomes would be really nice. And I think a lot of people at this stage in their career sort of feel that way. So I don't know, it's not necessarily related, it's related to your question, but not directly.
Well, Felice, you brought it up about the travel. And I want to talk about travel. Sometimes travel is embedded. You have to go to the prison, right? So you can't Zoom, I assume, to the prison. But what about the conferences? Do you find you're going to fewer conferences post-Zoom or post-COVID than pre? Or that's my sense, but I'm just getting older, and I go to fewer conferences.
Mine's post-kids. Yeah, I think I've had to become way more selective, and there's really one conference that I try to go to at least every other year. It's the one that I just mentioned, because there's so many people that I have worked with for many years, and we really learn from each other and what's going on at that conference. But I'm not sure that it's. Yeah, I don't think it was an intentional decision, other than sort of by necessity, not to travel as much.
Sure.
Well, just briefly, but I do see a change in museums and galleries in the way that they program exhibitions, whereas before there wouldn't be as much hesitation to like fly, this body of work from an artist from Europe to here, whereas like there's a little bit more sensitivity to the environmental impact that has. So, and also in the exhibition itself, before, more readily they will build walls and paint all over the place, and things that would kind of be wasteful in so many different ways. So I can see curators and a lot of people involved being much more sensitive for how to maximize resources and how to make exhibitions that are less impactful. So yeah.
Cool. Any others?
I'm filled with tension with that question, because right, we don't want to fly, and there's so much waste in many ways when you go to a conference, like the paper cups and all that. So we could just do it through Zoom. But the tension is, I know, and because it's what I study, then there's a need for face-to-face connections and that hallway talk, where sometimes those are the best conversations at conferences, and you don't get that through Zoom. So I actually concur in that with kids. That's probably the main reason why I'm more selective. But I still really value conferences. I think they're very important, in-person conferences. If anything, there was a rebound effect with COVID, like, I really want to go, and I really want to talk with people, groups of people, random conversations, not on Zoom.
A change that I've seen recently at conferences is moving away from the traditional, session with 5 presentations and a little bit of Q&A, and then we move to the next one, to more discussions, which I think has been wonderful, because it does, create that space where you have those conversations as part of the conference. And I think that's been very productive from a research perspective for me.
Cool. Should we switch to Q&A? Okay. Well, thank you all. So now we have a chance to hear from the audience, and if you have questions of your fellow panelists as well. So let's see if anyone has questions, raise your hand. That could be on Zoom or in person. Have a question, just go ahead. And then meanwhile, if we're waiting for questions to come in, after a little Q&A, where there's going to be a refreshment and postering, and Brett will explain more about that later. So, any questions yet? I don't know.
I have a question unless there's a question
Yes.
from somebody else. I think it's a question maybe for you a little bit. Something that came across, I think, in a few other presentations was thinking about sustainability, or the importance of thinking about sustainability intersectionally, and I think it's something that you mentioned, and I really like the way that you were thinking about sustainability as mode of action, as power and control. So I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, that's a great question. Thanks, Juan. Well, I just thought about that as thinking as a way of connecting the projects that I was involved in, trying to think about commonalities across those projects. And I was thinking of of a space of sustainability. Often I think the work that we do needs to be understood within the sustainability space, and thinking in the context of southernness as being not so much a geographical place, but more kind of a relational, so to speak, to a kind of a relational situation. And so I found it useful to think of sustainability practice within the kind of relations that are associated with doing sustainability.
Cool.
I'm not sure, maybe there is literature on this, and I didn't have the time to locate this idea within literature, and I'm sure there must be, and I'm happy to dig around and share it with you.
So I have a question for, outreach is now something we all have to address in our proposals, and how you make your research relevant to Canadians, the taxpayers who are paying for it. And there does seem to be this a little bit of expertism going on. No one likes experts. So how do you do that? How do you make your research? So Felice, imagine you're at Tim Hortons in a small town. How do you make people care about women in prison? Like, is that a tough sell for you, or you must have encountered this a lot?
Well, maybe I'll come back to that
Yes.
specific question and context of Tim Hortons and that conversation. But I was thinking about the whole question, expert.
Yes.
I guess with my research, I am not the expert, and that's always been my approach. I'm not the expert.
Great.
Well, what's your research question? How do you want to do it? I've actually said I don't know, and so it's emergent, and it's really based on a collaborative conversation where the research process emerges. And so I think, I suppose I am one of those individuals who does like expert. I'm not an expert. I don't want to be the expert, but I want to be the bridge of your experience to society or to academia. Working with women in prison, I don't know, maybe I've been lucky enough to just converse mostly with people who recognize that they're there because of the oppression and marginalization. Yeah, so I haven't really had to defend, or maybe it's because they don't dare ask. So I'm not sure, but I haven't had to really defend why I do the work that I do. But it's going to get me thinking. I might have nightmares about it.
Sorry. Any others? Yeah.
Sure. I think I'd like to speak to that question of experts, because I think the projects that I've been working on do engage with the idea of who is, what is the question of control, and whose knowledge is considered authoritative. And I think in the Tiganios project, that's certainly been a conversation about, it's not been like an explicit conversation, but there is a subtext of making sure that community ideas around around what is the food for and how the food is being used do get embedded into the design of the food hub. And we are still in the process of figuring that out. And why it's becoming a bit complex is because those ideas that have emerged from the community consultation need to be translated by an architectural firm, and then have engineering students work on the technical designs. And then there are these different aspects of translation, and how the community priorities could get translated by the architect, and then how do you get that implemented by the engineering students? I don't practice as an engineer, and so my understanding of those connections is not very strong, and we don't have an practicing engineer on the team. And so that's been an issue of how is it that we can do that kind of translation. We're still not there yet, but that's something to think about. Now, in the other projects that I've been involved in, I think the focus on mega projects in order to solve mobility issues, and that's present even in Montreal. I mean, the REM as a solution to automobile congestion. I'm not sure that's really going to answer it. I mean, one of the first moves that they did in operationalizing the REM was to close the bus lines that come from the South Shore into the city, and this is a classic move in so many mega projects where the threat is not so much from the automobile user, but the threat is from public transit, and so those kinds of so these questions of expertise is really there.
The expert telling the community what they need. It's interesting that two people do community research, don't identify as experts at all, which is kind of refreshing. But
we have a question in the audience, and I believe afterwards we have one online as well. Oh, Rebecca. Rebecca, go ahead if you wanted to.
Rebecca.
I don't have to jump in. Someone else can go first. Sorry.
Go ahead, Rebecca.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I was a little late, but it's wonderful to see you all. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. I have a question for all of you, really. Oops. There we go. For all of you, really, but maybe especially for Shannon. Anyways, you brought up the issue of children and traveling for conferences, and there have been, there are sustainability issues involved, obviously, with the cost of traveling, but also there are huge accessibility issues. And one thing that we saw during the pandemic was that things were suddenly more accessible to women, more accessible to people who might be, far away and have trouble traveling, more accessible to people who don't have the big grants to attend meetings and conferences. So, so definitely, both of those things. And what I have seen since, in the past couple of years really is first this big push to make the online, innovate and make the online meetings work. Let's, think about new ideas, breakout rooms, or ways that we can make it the most like a real conference or a traditional in-person conference. And then that really just falling apart, as Govind said, in my experience, and just going back to, okay, we're going back to this model of in-person because we really want to see each other. But again, still the problems of sustainability, the emissions, but also of accessibility, right? So going back to that model that prioritizes the privileged. So I'm wondering if those kinds of discussions are happening in any of the societies that you're part of, the conferences that you go to. Are we really just back to you got to be in person, or are we seeing discussions around accessibility as well as emissions? Are those conversations happening in tandem? Are people making the links there, or is it really just, we're done, pandemic is over, that was a blip, back to the old norm?
Yeah, so I'm a sample size of one, but I can give you the experiences that I've had from this perspective. So one of the things that happened during the pandemic is students who couldn't get visas to travel to some of the places where our conferences were got to participate and present their research at those conferences, and that's not necessarily been the case. In addition, the conferences are very expensive, and I feel that they've gotten more expensive, and the hotel costs have gotten more expensive. So our ability to send more students to conferences has decreased. So this is, I know when we talk about inclusiveness, there's many different aspects, but the thing that's been on my mind is, because of the conversations I've had recently at conferences, is about students' ability to engage in the conferences and attend them and present at them and whatnot. And so this has been something that almost all of the academics that were at a recent conference that I was at brought up as a problem. And so, yeah, and also I think location, the big conferences in terms of where they're located, they could move around to other places in order to allow different people to attend different years. So these were the discussions that we were having. I don't know if anybody has any other different. I agree. I feel that it's actually like worse than before the pandemic, and that it's just so costly now to go to conferences. I don't know if anyone else had any other. All right, we're done there. No.
No? Go
No,
ahead.
I tend to agree with what you said, Shannon, and I think I think it's high time that we think of another medium or another mode of interaction. I mean, I think there have been similar kinds of questions that have been raised about kind of credentialing of academic research. I mean, currently understood through peer-reviewed publications. I don't know, but I think it's important to think of how we could reimagine the work that we do and how it needs to be presented and approved in some way by peers. Yeah, I don't have any answers.
Great, thank you. Was there another question? Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. I really appreciate your presentations and all of this conversation. I was flipping between two questions, but Rebecca asked my first one. So I'll go with the second. Hearing you talk about incorporating sustainability research practices into your research, it sounds like it comes with a lot of tension. It comes with tension in terms of what you're expected to do as researchers. There also seems to be some tension sometimes between social and environmental sustainability and how those two can sort of contradict each other sometimes. Taking a swing in the dark here, Brett mentioned we have a sustainability in research action plan. If we were imagining the next iteration of the sustainability research plan, what would you want to see in it? Like, what would you love to see Concordia do that would enable you to make your research more sustainable, both socially and environmentally?
I think I raised my hand before my thoughts were like fully formulated, but I think speaking from sculpture and studio arts, I would love for Concordia to develop strong partnerships with the city for repurposing materials. So things like, you know, the ash trees that are cut down because of the bug. I know that a lot of that wood goes to Bois Public, this nonprofit organization, but developing kind of like specific partnerships within the city where we can bring some of that material on campus for repurpose and for reuse. I would love to see that. Kind of like what soccer does, but kind of like, you know, blown up into a bigger scale. But yes, thank you.
I think our research plan needs to focus on the graduate students who are supporting the research. I think a fair and living wage for all students across the university, regardless of which faculty they're a part of, would be critically important. I find that our students have been put under a lot of pressure. Montreal was a very affordable place to live when I first moved here. It is not the case now. And as we all know, food has gotten more expensive. So yeah, I think a big focus on, it's not just faculty conducting the research, there are a lot of students behind the research that's going on, and I think the quality of life for students is critically important to be thinking about.
I think, well, Concordia is already doing this, but it certainly could continue, is the way in which it supports research or like Concordia relationships with the community. Because we already know and we've already heard criticisms about the fly in, fly out kind of a mentality to research, and we have to stop that. And so SHIFT, which was already mentioned earlier, is amazing. It's an amazing part of Concordia that does a phenomenal job of creating those relationships between academics and community and students and community, offer internships, they help manage them. I think as academics, we're not very good, we're not trained to facilitate these relationships and sometimes provide the support that our community organizations and partners need, but SHIFT is there. And I know SHIFT's funding from the Saputo Foundation, I think, is nearing an end, so it would be amazing if the university could find a way to continue what SHIFT does, keep SHIFT around, and not have it, like, there's this, I think, fear now, at least for me, maybe for Govind too, because I know you do stuff that, you know, they might disappear. And with that falls the network that Concordia has already been doing a really good job of creating.
Yeah, and to kind of build upon that, and I think I'm looking particularly at your work, Felice, as the director of the INDIE program, and I think thinking about interdisciplinarity and how we incorporate interdisciplinarity into sustainability research is very important, and that's where I think the role of graduate students and thinking about the kind of connections with the city also and so what does interdisciplinarity in doing research mean, and how does that translate into sustainability? I think there needs to be a conversation on that.
Are there other questions? Yes, at the back.
Thank you, everybody. Great discussion. I was thinking about the relationship between funding and research, and also Govind mentioned sometimes the funding distribution is not fair, whether among profs or departments. And as we are also all feeling all the crisis in the society, like the food insecurity, social isolation, housing crisis. So we have lots of community issues that are not only important, but also urgent. And how do you see this funding distribution is equal with the crisis that the society is experiencing?
Go ahead, Govind.
No, sorry. But could you just repeat that last bit of that question? How do you see?
So there is a distribution of fundings for different projects, and we have some serious challenges outside, like food insecurity, social isolation, housing crisis, all of these. How do you see these portions of fundings are equal for with the crisis? How much funding, how much percent of funding is guaranteed for these problems? So my feeling is that generally we see a kind of general trend that fundings for social projects are reducing, but I don't have any evidence. Do you have any information?
Anybody have any sense of that?
I think it's really going to depend on our next government. I know that, like, I first started prison work when Harper was in power, and never, let's just be more tough on crime and put them away, and never mind the kind of research that would be more supportive. And deal with a lot of what you're talking about, like the social crisis of housing and drug overdosing and food disparity. And then Trudeau came, and I think SHIRK funding, went up when he was first elected. I don't know what's happening now. But unfortunately, we are attached to that. I think we're very much attached to the political game, if I can say. So I think we need to be innovative in a way to ensure that we continue the work that we're doing and find ways to I guess do the work, maintain our integrity, but yet make it fit in the system. Because I think you're right. Like, it's not. There's always a new trend, politically, and In that sense, we remain kind of dependent on that, but there's ways in which we can be resilient. And this is part of it, I think, conversations like this and the interdisciplinarity that you're talking about, yeah, and the collaboration.
If I could just add to that point, I think, yes, I think there have been dips in the funding potentially, but I think what's really important to note is that Concordia has several really interesting internal funding opportunities, and some of them are particularly open to the kinds of social change agendas that so within engineering also the funding for the agri-food hub was from an engineering from the Faculty of Engineering, and they created this this funding envelope called the Research and Innovation Fellowship, and it supports partnership with industry partners, but also with community partners. And so I think Concordia in that sense has been very proactive in doing that internally, and I don't know enough externally. I mean, I know there have been initiatives like these big funding agencies, but I don't know if they've been dipping or not. I'm not too sure.
One thing to add to the conversation is I think that I just came off sabbatical, so I've been thinking a lot about my life's work. And so from the way the funding impacts my ability to understand and fulfill whatever my life's work is that I'm constantly jumping from project to project to project. And so I think it really minimizes the amount of impact that I can make as a researcher, because I think that if we, this idea of, starting something and seeing it through is really challenging because of that. And so that's the only thought that I'd like to add to the conversation.
Yes. We're okay, Brett?
Hi, thank you again for sharing all of your very fantastic research projects. I'm a master's student in international climate politics. And so to keep going on the political trend of our questions, I was wondering, how do you perceive the UN Sustainable Development Goals as researchers, and how are you using the good and the bad to make better research?
Well, two of them didn't mention the goals, so two did. So who wants to take a... We're often obliged to sometimes say how we're related. How my research is related to this goal. That's sometimes in a grant, but whether or not it affects it. But does anyone?
At first I was very excited because I thought it was quite holistic. And it's like, the work that I do, it could fit. I actually never really thought about it from the perspective of sustainability until last year. And it's been a different lens, and it's been very, I don't know what the word, contribute to the way in which I think about the work that I do. And so in that way, it's very exciting. More recently, though, I was into the human rights education literature, thanks to a grad student. And she actually wrote about how the UN's, like a lot of their, what do you call them? The things they put out that we're all supposed to follow or adopt are quite Western and colonized. And so I would be very curious to hear about, looking at Govind because I'm thinking like that, the South or the developing countries, like what are their perspectives on these UN goals? And so I've not had the chance to dive into it, but I'm curious, and maybe to look at it from a more critical lens, I think is important, especially in this desire to decolonize.
Yeah, I think I could add. So I think that the Sustainable Development Goals are a nice a framework that touches on all the important themes, or most of the important themes, but I think that, first of all, they're contradictory. You can't actually simultaneously achieve all SDGs, I don't think. But also I think that they, to have all countries be signatories on any UN, declaration or document or whatever it may be, you have to compromise. And so I think just by nature of, what they are, it's a framework of compromise. And so, I would say, I think that, I cannot remember there's the preamble that goes into the SDGs, and I think that it touches on the definition of sustainable development and a focus on the most vulnerable, and I think that that's lost in the SDGs. I think it's sometimes helpful to position your research in this big idea of sustainability or sustainable development, but I think the SDGs are definitely a work in progress. Do you want to see why you didn't talk about the SDGs?
I think Shannon, I think that was a great idea, that it was a framework of compromise, and I think that's how I've also seen it, and so, like Felice, I think what you said was also true. I think there's, these are nationally agreed to goals within, and so they're in some ways, and how they get implemented is also decided by the national government in respective jurisdictions, and whether they, and so there's all this interpretation that happens at the national level when a lot of the work of actually getting things done doesn't happen at the national level. And so there's all this slippage between what is decided within that framework at the transnational level, and then how that filters through till it gets to a university, and then we are looking at something very different. So I don't know. I've never found it very useful to look at that, look at the goals very carefully. I think it's an interesting thing, and like you said, I don't know if you want to add it.
No.
Okay. Well, thank you all. I think we probably should let did you want to?
Go ahead. We can wrap up. I just said.
Go. No.
I was one thought about the SDGs as well is that I think one important theme that has been growing among the academic community, especially in sort of from the business perspective, that isn't captured is the idea of degrowth. So I think the biggest problem with the SDGs is it just assumes, continual endless growth for everyone. Economic growth, and so from a policy perspective and from an economic perspective, I think that would be an interesting thing to think about is what would the SDGs look like if we thought about, targeted degrowth.
Or at least zero growth.
Or zero growth.
Yeah.
But growth in some areas, of course.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to our 4 speakers, panelists, for those great presentations and thoughtful answers. So thank you. And thanks to the audience. So back to Brett, who's going to tell us what we're going to do next.
Thank you so much, Jim. Yeah, that was brilliant. Lost some words a little bit, but yeah, thank you so much. And our audience members, thank you. Folks who are online, thank you. So now we're going to have a poster session with grad students who've been invited from across the faculties. I don't know if we have all the faculties represented, but at least 3, I believe. So for the next 20 minutes or so, we'll have the grad students standing by their posters that'll be displayed on the screen here for folks in person to go chat with them, learn about. Please go get food, coffee, tea, bathroom break if you need. And then around 4:30, we'll have each student do a bit more of a formal pitch if they want. Thank you everyone again. And so for folks online, if you want to take a small break and then come back, I don't know, in like 20 minutes-ish to hear the presentations from the grad students, that would be great. But we would not blame you if you took off. Okay, thank you everyone.
Okay. Wonderful. So if you just want to start, tell us your name, the title of the poster, and then what it is you've been researching.
Okay. Hi, I am Mina. Okay. Hi, I am Mina Danishmandi, a PhD student here. I'm working with Dr. Shannon Lloyd, and my research focuses on life cycle assessment. in one of the SDG goals is about providing workers with decent, safe workplace. And about 2 million people die every year due to risk factor at workplace. So this is a necessity, and it has to be included into assessment tools such as life cycle assessment, because life cycle assessment it is supposed to, after all, give businessmen, decision makers to know where they should focus on, how they, what they should do to move toward sustainability, and this hotspot can be shown by LCA when it kind of quantify all the impact. But the point is that in regular LCA, this aspect of human health impact at workplace are excluded. So my research focuses on developing a methodology to kind of develop this impact into this assessment to provide decision makers with a better picture. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, and next up, I think we have Teresa. So just start with your name, the title, and then a little bit of your project.
Thank you. My name is Teresa Dory. Project is Sustainable Studios. It's a student-led group project, and the next phase of research is really connecting with other departments. So if you're interested at all, you can follow us on Instagram or just send me an email. I really was excited about this opportunity just to connect with other departments, because I feel that that's kind of where we can look towards for the future, which is cheesy, but we won this award that is all about the future. And this is the award. It's very heavy. We really weren't expecting to win it though, or I wasn't expecting to win, I should say, because it's an environmental award and our project is arts-based. But that just goes to show that creative ways of thinking through these larger issues can impact change. So thank you so much.
Next up, I believe we have Dr. Mo.
Thank you, everybody. My name is Mo. I recently graduated from Individualized PhD program, who's Felix, the director, and I did this project with Le Collective Comment. Jonathan is the director of Comment. This project was a community-led project with focus on homelessness, and we mostly, while I started research, we asked, what does that mean? And I started, what does homelessness mean? And my research has two aspects. One, asking from policy level, that we have 38 national definitions of homelessness among OECD countries, that Canada is part of them. And also in the local level, I had almost 2 years experience with the collective comment, and through that experience, I use heuristic research as a method for reflecting on the meaning of homelessness and how my perspective to homelessness has changed. In the policy level, what I understood that there are many perspectives or genres, like genre of security, like the way police see the situation, genre of vulnerability, donors, activists see it as an issue of human rights. At the same time, at the common level and the local level, I noticed that homelessness is a kind of form of protest against all the social issues that we are experiencing. I went to the street, I started collaborating with unhoused people, and my focus was on the street, but the people on the street changed my focus to where I'm coming from, that also university is part of this, and they're asking about, you're coming from a society that has the history of genocide and all the social injustice issues. And on one picnic table at Common, we were talking about homelessness, and one person, Stefan, was saying that I'm 30 years on the streets of Montreal, and I see lots of trends, many researchers, activists, policymakers come and go, but they never talk to each other. And he says that it's so easy to solve homelessness, you should make a soup. You need a big pot, and everybody comes and put their ideas, traumas, pains, resources together and start talking as we talk about the importance of interdisciplinary communication and also multi-actor communication. And based on the subsidy idea, I made a kind of card game to make sense of the complexity of homelessness. And generally, the main outcome of my research is that we cannot understand and address homelessness without community engagement. And Jonathan says it takes a village. I also asked Jonathan to add some points.
Thanks, so. Yeah, well, I think talking about the village, we're talking about the fact that sustainability for us is in our relationship we build in our village. And especially when we meet people like outsiders from university, researchers, it's kind of a funny feeling to see somebody who's not from the village who's trying to be part of something that we don't understand what really, and they don't necessarily say what they do. And I think sustainability should be simple because it's actually how nature works. But it feels like to understand life at university, you have to fragment it in so many little portions. And most of the time, people are now stuck in that little portion, but they forget about the globality of it. So I think the village, it's kind of a simple model where you know what everybody does. So somebody does the farming, somebody does the thing with the milk, somebody processes the cereals, and then you respect this, and everybody has a role that is clear and you can participate together. So we're just trying to rebuild this. And sustainability, I think, is also in the research you do. Like, we tell you a lot of things, but then we talk to one researcher who just take what he wants and throw the rest away. So I think the research material should be more centralized, more tagged and analyzed so you can access it over time. So like all the time that I met researchers, wherever they are, it still goes back to a commune vault that we can share. So I think you could think about that sustainability in what you do. And I'm thinking also research should center in making the human system a place to blossom and not a place to become vulnerable, because that's what we have now. So yeah, you should do this first. Thank you.
So, hello everyone. My name is Jonathan Molansky, and I'm a PhD student in geography. And this was my research partner, Jimmy Cow, who is a PhD student in economics. So our research examined the impact of municipal solid waste collection policies on recycling rates, focusing on policies that did not involve financial incentives or disincentives like user fees or pay-as-you-throw policies. And the objective was to show how variations in curbside collection policies could influence recycling rates, and also to determine which demographic factors were associated with higher recycling rates. Given the lack of publicly available data in Canada, we did a case study in the UK where data was available and curbside collection programs are similar. So we collected data from 310 municipalities in England and Wales, and fitted a linear regression model to reveal associations. So the model suggested that the ideal policy combination included a weekly organic food waste collection, less frequent garbage collection, which was every 3 or 4 weeks, and a free yard waste service. So these policies appear to encourage more recycling by providing more frequent collection for recyclable and compostable materials, and to discourage excessive waste by providing less frequent garbage collection. And regarding demographics, the model showed positive correlations with higher education levels and living in Wales, emphasizing the importance of setting ambitious national targets, where Wales is actually kind of a leader, and also the importance of education. And it also revealed some negative correlations with certain demographics, kind of highlighting where recycling education programs could be focused. In conclusion, our findings indicate that we could optimize recycling rates just by adjusting curbside collection programs without resorting to any kind of financial penalties on people. But we also conclude this approach is unlikely to raise recycling rates significantly higher than national targets. And to do that, and achieve more sustainable waste management goals, more strict policies or innovative approaches would be needed to drive recycling rates higher. That was our study.
You add something?
If you want.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to add slightly more things to the modeling part. It's not just as simple as a linear regression, but we've done a lot of different validation techniques to verify the robustness of our findings. And so we've done a series of different beta regression models, which is a model in statistics and econometrics that was designed to model this kind of response variables, where we have continuous variables bounded in 0 and 1, because it's a recycling rate and it doesn't go up higher than 1 or go below 0. And we've also done some regularization techniques to our linear regression model. We've done LASSO, we've done enrich, and all these different techniques show very, very similar results to our main model. That's how we concluded that our model is robust enough to different analysis techniques. And so, like Jonathan has said, this is basically what we found by doing this project. Thank you.
For those of you online, thank you so much for sticking around. We're going to be closing up the live and Zoom now, but just a reminder that this is already available on our YouTube channel. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great afternoon. For those of you here in the space, stick around, ask some poster questions, and have some snacks. Thanks so much.